Thank you, delegates. Good afternoon. Is that working? Yeah. So, honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, Parliament friends, and prestigious speakers, here we are. The end of Parliament 2015 is coming. 3 days ago, I was telling you you would be living an amazing experience. Was I right? I have to say I'm quite impressed to see some of you today, because when I was watching you dancing last night, I bet you couldn't wake up at all today and be here present in the closing ceremony, so thank you for coming. So, as far as I know, all your chairs have been satisfied of your work during committee sessions. You proved to prepare quite well, and for those who hadn't, you still have been very convincing. I haven't been able to read all the resolution yet, but I can't wait to do it. I would like especially to thank the UN News Committees and applaud them. Because, for the first year, fake real newspapers have been tweeting about committee debates, and although tweets were sometimes very serious, they were more often very funny, and I strongly encourage you to read them after today. They're very funny, especially Fox News actually. Special mentions for some hashtags. Hashtag someone give me roses. Hashtag all you need is love, followed by hashtag hey Jude. Very classic hashtags. Thank you, UN committees. So still in this committee, a few serious articles related to committees topics have been written, and you'll be able to read them on our website very soon. As I was very busy, I don't exactly know what was going on in other committees. I just know that many people died and were taken as hostages by the crisis staff. Yeah. For my part, I really enjoyed talking to some of you during the social and during the whole conference. I loved reading your human Parliament stories. Also your spotteds, your gossip, the leaders written on the roses. You were quite amazing delegates, so thank you. Thank you. So in order to end Parliament in the best way, we will now hear 4 speakers. So, Mrs. Sandra Coulibaly from the Organisation Internationale pour la Francophonie, Mr. Mohamed Maoubdallah from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Developments, Mrs. Céline Bardet, the founder of We Are Not Weapons of War, and finally, Jacques Rao from the UNESCO itself. Afterwards, delegates, will we go through what you're all waiting for, so the award ceremonies. And then I have to say, delegates who don't come on stage to collect your awards, because it would take too long, I'm sorry. So you will collect your certificate of participation and awards just outside of the room after the ceremony, okay? To start with our first speakers, maybe, should we call them on stage? Dongsin. So I would like you to welcome Madame Sandra Coulibaly. Madame Céline Bardet. Monsieur Mohamed Maoubdallah. Et Monsieur Jacques Rao, s'il vous plaît. So for our first speakers, Madame Céline Bardet, I have been quite impressed by her resume and the action she took in her life, as she is an expert in international justice. She started her career by working at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in La Haye. She then focused more on war crime and especially on rape as a weapon of war, which led her to create We Are Not Weapons of War in 2014, Please warmly welcome Mrs. Céline Bardet.
Thank you. That's very impressive to look at you. Here? You can hear me? Yeah? Okay. First, I prepare a speech in French. And I thought there would be interpreters. And I thought French is the language of multilateral discussion. So... Now, also a person, if, you understood a bit, who work on the field a lot, and I'm very pragmatical. So my first question would be, who does not understand French? Just raise your hand. Wow. So your career is over, you know that. Okay. No, so anyway, so I will speak in English. Sorry, because I thought if half of you, or like 2/3 of you, cannot understand, that would be really sad, because what I'm going to say is very interesting, of course. So I worked for the UN for a few years, and I have to tell you, I was in the negotiation of the UN Convention on Organized Crime and also on the UN Convention on Corruption. So I know what it is. Long days, long night, countries to try and find agreement over sometimes subjects that are very difficult. As Marion said, yes, I'm a lawyer. I'm also an international criminal investigator, and I've been working for many years now on war crime and crime against humanity. And since few years, I put a large focus on, of course, rape used as a weapon of war, because it's endemic, as you know. And I was very happy a few days ago, there was discussion at the UN and also at the EU to start thinking of incorporating in the counter-terrorism strategy rape used as a weapon of war, because it's also used as a strategy in terrorism by Boko Haram or by Daesh. So I think it's a very good move, because there is a lack of information and understanding of what is rape in conflict, why it is used, and how it is used. And we are not talking about collateral damages. We are not talking about the soldier who gets bored and think that, okay, he can find a woman and have fun with it. We are talking about strategies, process with objectives. So that was my first thing, and I encourage every one of you to get some interest about this subject, because especially in France, contrary to the common law country, we don't talk enough about that. There was the first summit in London organized by Angelina Jolie and William Hague. I'm working with Angelina Jolie on that, and I would be very happy that in France we involve a bit more on that. I've worked with the government on this question. So now what to tell you? Obviously you have spent two days working, partying also, yeah? So as I said, I wanted to tell you just very few things. I started my career with the UN, so the UN is my family. And even if I left the UN to be working more on the field, it remained my family. However, you know, in family, sometimes there are disagreements, and my dream would be that more and more people who spend time in very nice places, negotiating, discussing, all these people don't lose sight on reality, the reality of the field, the reality of people, And UN and negotiation and whatever you discuss at multilateral level, never forget that that involves human beings and life of human beings. And of course, when you work on the field, this reality is much more brutal. And sometimes you see how the institutions are not always in line with the reality of the field, with the needs of the people. And since you are the future, the first thing I wanted to tell you today is not to forget about that. And also in your career, and I don't know what you are going to do, try to take the chance and work a little bit on the field to have a more understanding of what is the reality of half of the world, even more than that. I saw a woman who was represented Libya. I worked in Libya the past 2 years. If I talk about Libya today, it's because it's a country I really like, and when I see the situation in Libya today, which is absolutely chaotic, and this is what you hear every day. But in Libya, I work with the Ministry of Justice, and actually France was very involved and supportive. We drafted a law recognizing rape used as a weapon of war in Libya and massive rape, setting up a commission for reparation and a judiciary commission. So meaning on the field and country, they try and do things, and sometimes they need more support and more understanding, and sometimes we need to a little bit put down our standard and to try to help them in a more concrete and efficient way. So that was the first thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing, and it was funny because just before we arrived here, we were talking with a very nice girl. I don't see where she is now. But since you are all students, you know, I came back in France last year, and I had then, because I was on the field for many years, and I got the opportunity to give many conferences in university, and students who contact me a lot, who wants to make internship with my NGO and ask for advice. And I saw many students very stressed out about the future, very interrogative about, okay, what cursus, I don't know if I say that in English, but, you know, I should choose what master, what blah. And then I always tell them, you know, me, and this is the moment I feel old, but I'm not, okay? 15 years ago, I didn't have that much of choice. I studied law, and then I studied international law, and then I met a judge. And then also I was very shocked because during my study, the war was in Bosnia, and I decided to work in this area of war crime. I never thought for a second I would join the ICTY. Never, ever. I didn't even have this hope. So the second thing I wanted to tell you today is you are actor, and you are actor of your life, and you have time to see what will happen to you. You can choose, and this is the, even though sometimes you think the contrary, half of the country doesn't have this preoccupation. They have other preoccupation. They need to survive. You have this choice. So try to look at it this way and try to think about what you would like to do. What sense you want to give to your life? Do you want to work in private sector, public sector? Do you want to study law? Stop thinking also that if you have this diploma that will lead you this or there. Me, okay, I was a lawyer, then I became an international criminal investigator, so for which I took a training, and that brought me to what I've been doing. So never forget that. And I think that's it, no, on the timing? No, I mean, if you tell me this, I can stay for a long time. No, no, I think I said all what I wanted. It's terrible because I have my thing in French, so I cannot follow it. But that's what I wanted to tell you. I didn't have any particular subject to talk about, or if you want to talk about war crime, conflict, and everything, no problem, just call me. The last thing I would like to ask you, and I thought it was a good opportunity. You know, most of the people, they have to survive in conflict, fight for their own life. There are also lots of people working for the UN. When I I talk about the UN as my family, it was my first family, professional family, and I still cooperate with the UN a lot, of course. There are people working for the UN on the field and for other organizations anyway, who get killed. And today I'm going to ask you something. 1 year ago, a young man called Clément Gorissen, who was my friend, was killed in Somalia during his mission. He was one of the most experienced specialists on piracy in Somalia, and he was executed by Shebab. He was French. We barely heard about that, unfortunately, in the media. And today, as you know, in France, it's the Mother's Day. And today I think about his mother, and I would ask you, for her, to get up today, and we're going to have a picture, and to send it to Sabine, his mother, because for her, the UN has remained a family. Her son died for doing his job. She lost her son, and what remains to her is the sense that he gave to his life, and it's very important to her. So to finish on a human note, this is what I want to ask you to do for her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Céline, for this very inspiring speech. I think we should think about this when we are debating in our committees, always reminding and keep in mind that this is about humans, and well, I'm not going to repeat what she just said, but just keep in mind, delegates, for the next Mother UN and for your future career. Our second speaker is currently a diplomat in charge of the United Nations direction within the Ministry, or the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and more specifically focusing on African affairs, nuclear negotiations, and Iran, and the Security Council reform. In the past, he has been working in New York, Belgrade, also for the European Parliament and for the Regional Council. So please welcome Mr. Mohamed Bouabdallah.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. I will start in French. En tant que diplomate français qui représente le ministère des Affaires étrangères et dans cette enceinte, l'UNESCO, qui représente la défense du multilinguisme et des différentes cultures, je dois commencer ce discours en français pour vous dire que nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir à Paris pour cette conférence. Paris et la France qui attachent une très grande importance au multilatéralisme. Et donc nous sommes heureux que cette conférence ait pu avoir lieu ici. Et je vous invite tous, et comme l'a dit ma collègue il y a quelques instants, à apprendre le français, car si vous voulez faire carrière dans le système des Nations Unies, il est important de maîtriser à la fois l'anglais et le français. Now I can switch to English. And just to resume what I said, to sum up what I said just now, we are very happy to welcome you in Paris. And as you know, France has been a long promoter of multilateralism. Paris is a capital, one of the UN capital. And I just want to tell you, to encourage you, as my colleague just did, to learn French, because in the international institutions, and especially in the UN, you cannot have a career if you don't master these two languages, which are English and French, and especially if you work in Africa, where French is really the most needed language to work on the field. I would like to give you some insight on what we do on a daily basis as diplomats in I work, as you said, I work in the French Ministry in Foreign Affairs. We have a team, a special team, who is dealing with the UN Security Council affairs. So we work with our embassy in New York, and we give instructions on a daily basis to our colleagues, to our ambassador in New York, and to decide, to reflect and decide on the French position. And basically, I work on West Africa, Mali, for example, but also on Iran. I participated to the negotiations in Lausanne with Iran and the other participants, and also the reform of the Security Council. You have been negotiating for a few days now, and I'm sure that you will try to pursue such training. And I would like to give you 3 lessons that I draw from my experience that I think are very important for you for the future. At least they were important for me. The first lesson is to listen. Sometimes people make the mistake and believe that diplomats are people who know how to speak. It's not about how to speak, it's about how to listen. The first quality for a diplomat, for a negotiator, is to listen, and to listen carefully. I have witnessed some negotiations that could have been a failure because the parties were not able to listen to each other. Or because when they were listening to each other, because you can pretend listening, but in fact you are not, you have prejudice in your mind, and you are not really listening to what the other side is saying. You are not trying to understand what is the profound motivation of someone's position, and you are just putting on his or her speech your own view of this position. So really, first quality of a diplomat is to listen and to be really careful on what the others try to say and why they are having this position. Because if you don't understand why, if you are not able to touch upon the very reason why they are taking this position, then you are unable to change their position. The second lesson that I draw from my experience is to know yourself. That's obviously a very old lesson that we take from Greece, ancient Greece, know yourself. But what I would like to say more specifically when you are negotiating in an international environment is that you have to know your capabilities, your assets, what you are good at when you are negotiating, but also what are your weaknesses. And from my point of view, the worst weaknesses that we can see is vanity. And vanity can be very tricky when you are negotiating because you are alone, you are negotiating on a very important issue, for example, the future of the Iranian nuclear program. And if you are not careful enough, you may face you may act on 2 ways that are not good for a diplomat. The first one is to block a negotiation for your own face-saving issue. There are always face-saving issues when you are entering a negotiation. Face-saving for a country, face-saving for a group of people, and that's okay. That's a parameter of a negotiation. But when it comes only to your own personal face-saving, then we have a problem. So vanity can lead to this situation when you block an international negotiation for your own face-saving. So try not to fall in that trap. The second trap is, on the other side, is that you may have the temptation to take risks, to take positions that have not been authorized by your authority, and to be, as we say, outside your instructions. So you know that because that's normally something we learn and we touch upon when we do simulation of international negotiations. But that's really something that you risk every day, to cross the line. And then you have an issue with your partner, because if you come back the next day saying, well, in fact, what I said was not true, my capital does not agree with that, then you have no credibility anymore, so you are out. And you have then the other issue with your own capital, which will think that you are not reliable enough, and you are out as well. The third lesson would be to be aware of the broader picture. There is also the temptation to, and it's not a temptation, that's the reality of life. You are really involved in your negotiation, you are really involved in your field. For example, you are a specialist of nuclear negotiation, or you are a specialist of climate negotiation, and so you are really deep into your knowledge, your negotiation, etc. But there is a risk of being too much of a specialist, and you need always to be aware of the broader picture, to try to understand why you are here, why your country or your organization is taking, or your NGO is taking such a position. What is the broader agenda? Why I'm here? And it gives you a sense of what you are doing, a purpose to what you are doing, and because you are not always successful when you negotiate. You can negotiate, and at the end it will be a failure, but if you are able to put your own small person and negotiation into the broader picture of the politics of your organization, then you are in a better position. So when it comes, and that will be my more general remarks I would like to do, when it comes to peace and security issues, which are the cornerstone of the Security Council, you can see three things again. The first one is that there is no perfect solution when you try to solve a crisis. It's always easy from the outside, when you are in the media, when you are in NGOs, and I have a lot of respect for NGOs, etc. But when you are outside of the negotiation that is taking place behind closed doors in the Security Council, you may have the temptation to say that it's not a good, perfect solution that has been negotiated, that it was not a good solution. Or in retrospect, when you go in the future and when you look back, and you may have the temptation to say, well, we should not have done that in this country, for example, in Libya, or we should not have done that in this country, for example, in Mali, etc., etc. Well, we have to be really cautious about such an attitude, and it's also something that we have in our own ministry, in our own between ourselves. There is no perfect solution. In fact, when some people say we should seek for the perfect solution, they sometimes say also, that's my second point, that we should do nothing rather than doing bad things. And I would like to say that when you are facing a crisis, doing nothing is still doing something. And actually, when we are sitting at the Security Council and we try to solve a crisis, to put an end to a war, to civil war, to crimes, to massive crimes, what we try to do is to find a solution, but what we do in practice is that we choose between bad solutions. And that's the reality of our work, of our daily work, and that's not very pleasant every day. We have to choose between bad solutions. And as the former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld, that you, I hope, all know, said once, the UN, the United Nations, was not created to take mankind to paradise, but to save mankind from hell. And that's what we try to do. We are not trying to reach the perfect solution, to reach the paradise, but we are trying to avoid going to hell. So when I've said all of this, you may find me, even though I'm still young by some standards, that I am now cynical and that I have lost my enthusiasm for the international negotiations, for the United Nations. That's not the case. I think that you have to strike the right balance when you enter such a life of international relations, especially on peace and security issues. You have to strike a right balance between being deeply involved, committed, and in a personal way, and that's something you need to give. You need to give your humanity to that, but you also need, and that's very important, to keep some distance with your work. If you don't do that, you face a risk of being destroyed by what you are going to see, but what you are going to do. So I think I will, I hope I didn't prevent you from entering such careers in the UN. That's really wonderful careers. That we have a risk, and as my colleague just said, we face, unfortunately, casualties on the field. 2 days ago, it was the UN Peacekeeping Day, and every day, peacekeepers, soldiers, but also civilians, are paying a high cost to peace and security in the world. But nevertheless, what we try to do in the Security Council, in the UN, with our partners, is, I think, important, and if we were not doing that, nobody will do that. So I hope that I will have the opportunity to speak with some of you after these speeches, but also to meet some of you in the future, either in New York or on the field, again, as she said. Go in the field, go to Africa, go to the Middle East, go to see by your own eyes what is going on, how the people there are looking at what we are trying to do in New York or in Paris or in the big capitals. But again, I hope that you enjoyed your stay in Paris, and I hope to see you very soon in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To continue, I would like you to welcome Sandra Coulibaly-Leroy. She served as the Deputy Director for Cultural Development and Diversity Programs, and for 12 years, she was posted as Deputy Permanent Representative of the IOF to the United Nations Office in Geneva, dealing with human rights issues. Today, she holds the position of Assistant Director in charge of Foresight and Strategic Intelligence Programs for the International Organization of the Francophonie. So please welcome Sandra Coulibaly-Leroy, who will speak in French.
Thank you, Marion. Just a few questions before starting. Who is coming from Asia? Okay. Who is coming from Africa? Okay. North America? Latin America? Okay, great. Good sample. I will speak on behalf of the International Organization of the Francophonie. Who knows this organization? Wow. Thank you. So, therefore, I will deliver my statement in French. And j'ai un quart d'heure, 20 minutes. But just for people who doesn't understand French, I will try to explain which decision-making process we used in my organization and in the name of which values they are undertaken. Mais en premier lieu, je vous transmets les regrets de Madame Michaëlle Jean, notre secrétaire générale de la francophonie, qui ne peut pas être avec nous aujourd'hui. Et elle le regrette vivement. Parce que depuis le début du PIMOUN, la francophonie est à vos côtés. Parce qu'on sait, et vous le savez mieux que quiconque, que c'est un exercice exigeant sur le plan physique et intellectuel. Mais c'est également un entraînement fécond à l'appréhension du système multilatéral par les résultats concrets qu'il génère, et tout particulièrement les résolutions, les décisions que vous avez prises, que vous avez négociées pendant ces quelques jours, et on m'a demandé de les porter à l'attention de Madame Michaëlle Jean. Elle me l'a demandé et elle en prendra connaissance avec grand intérêt. En particulier cette année, parce que le thème que vous avez choisi, la problématique qui a sous-tendu vos jours de simulation, l'interdépendance du processus de décision, paix, diversité et responsabilité, c'est évidemment une problématique qui permet et qui devrait permettre d'embrasser la complexité du monde. Comme le rappelait l'écrivain philosophe Édouard Glissant, il aimait à dire, comme le disait aussi Stéphane Hessel, qui vient de nous quitter, ces deux géants, il aimait qualifier le monde dans lequel nous vivons de l'intraitable diversité du monde. Et il aimait qualifier les processus de décision prise au niveau local, régional et international comme des principes d'universalité. Et c'est bien cette recherche d'universalité qui devrait structurer non seulement les mécanismes et modalités de prise de décision, ces fameux decision-making process, mais également orienter leur finalité. Parce que prendre des décisions en toute responsabilité au sein de nos organisations, c'est in fine bâtir un monde plus juste et solidaire en faveur de la paix, des droits de l'homme, de la démocratie, de l'éducation, que Madame Michaëlle Jean aime qualifier d'armes de construction massive et de développement durable. Mais ces mécanismes devraient également contribuer à construire un monde où la sécurité humaine ne serait plus un vœu pieux, mais bel et bien une assurance vie pour toutes et tous d'entre nous, où qu'ils naissent, où qu'ils vivent, où qu'ils soient, dans le respect et la promotion de la diversité. Et dans les minutes qui vont m'être consacrées pour vous parler de cela, j'aimerais vous expliquer un peu en profondeur comment ce principe de prise de décision est appliqué au sein de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, qui est une organisation atypique dans le système multilatéral. Vous allez le comprendre pourquoi. En 1970, ce sont 21 pays qui ont choisi la diversité comme moteur d'anticipation en termes de doctrine et de positionnement. Ils ont opté pour le consensus en termes de processus de décision. Et c'est ce consensus qui est encore en vigueur aujourd'hui, alors que l'organisation compte 80 pays, dont le Mexique, le Canada, la Thaïlande, la Côte d'Ivoire, le Mali, etc. Alors, contrairement à d'autres institutions, je pense à l'Union européenne, je pense évidemment aux Nations Unies, à l'UNESCO et toutes ces institutions spécialisées, le principe ontologique de cette organisation est basé sur une ressource intangible qui est la langue française, que ces États ont choisi de partager, et également un principe qui est celui de l'exploitation d'une ressource culturelle et l'expression de sa diversité. Alors vous l'avez compris, en francophonie, on ne vote pas parce qu'on souhaite incarner aussi un laboratoire du multilatéralisme en processus de concertation, d'échange, de dialogue interculturel, et pour ceux qui viennent du continent africain, de Palabre, qui est peut-être un des plus vieux processus de facilitation du monde. Et que cela soit au niveau des instances officielles, donc au niveau des sommets des chefs d'État et de gouvernement, des Sherpas, puisque nous réunissons tous les 2 ans les représentants des présidents, premiers ministres, mais également au sein des groupes des ambassadeurs francophones qui sont postés auprès des Nations Unies, à New York, à Genève, à Vienne, auprès de l'Union africaine, à Addis Abeba, et également auprès de l'Union européenne. Et en 2000, ces pratiques de consultation ont permis d'adopter un texte majeur qui est la déclaration de Bamako, qui est un texte qui autorise l'organisation à suspendre, voire complètement exclure un État ou un gouvernement. Ça a été le cas du Togo, du Mali, de la Mauritanie, de la Guinée, de la Guinée-Bissau et actuellement de la Thaïlande et de la RCA en cas de violation massive des droits de l'homme, en cas de rupture de l'état de droit et des pratiques démocratiques. Et ce texte nous permet d'affirmer sur le terrain, comme l'a rappelé Céline, parce que quelle serait la finalité de la diplomatie si elle n'était pas incarnée dans des actions concrètes sur le terrain, et elles peuvent pour nous s'exprimer ou se traduire par des actions de facilitation et de médiation, et in fine en faveur de la paix. Parce que si vous voyez la carte du monde, eh bien ces dernières années, l'espace francophone, en particulier l'Afrique francophone, l'Afrique de l'Ouest, l'Afrique centrale, mais d'autres évidemment régions du monde, ont été le théâtre de nouveaux conflits qualifiés d'internes, mais qui sont pour la plupart basés sur des dynamiques de confrontation ethnique, interculturelle. Eh bien, ces crises qui sont héritées, c'est vrai, peut-être du passé, mais qui sont souvent inédites parce que non prévisibles, elles ont en commun d'être inscrites dans un terreau culturel particulier. Et ceux-ci doivent être absolument analysés. Ils doivent être traduits par des actions qui incluent pas seulement une action coercitive, mais une action d'accompagnement. Et c'est dans cet environnement mouvant que la francophonie a tenté au fil des années de bâtir une approche originale, tant par la doctrine que par la pratique, convaincue que la médiation est un outil indispensable de la diplomatie multilatérale et dans le règlement évidemment pacifique des conflits. La complémentarité avec l'ONU, et je ne sais pas si vous le savez, mais nous sommes évidemment sous le chapitre 8 de la Charte des Nations Unies, et à ce titre, nous entretenons des relations régulières avec l'Assemblée générale, avec évidemment les pays membres du Conseil, et évidemment avec nos 80 représentants de nos pays membres qui siègent aux Nations Unies. Alors, chers participants, je voudrais juste peut-être aussi déconstruire certaines idées reçues concernant le consensus, qui est souvent jugé comme une méthode molle, une méthode sans résultat, une méthode des faibles. Eh bien, le consensus n'implique pas forcément le renoncement et le manque d'ambition. En 2004, notre organisation a opté, un an avant le sommet du millénaire, pour le principe de la responsabilité de protéger, qui, vous le savez, a bousculé les frontières de l'humanitaire. Elle a réitéré sa position en 2006 lors d'une première conférence ministérielle consacrée à la sécurité humaine et à la prévention des conflits, de l'importance des thématiques. Et puis le consensus ne génère pas l'absence d'innovation ni l'immobilisme, comme on a tendance à le décréter. L'engagement de la francophonie en matière de sécurité collective, elle ne s'est traduit pas par évidemment la fourniture de casques bleus sur le terrain, mais permettre à nos pays d'être présents dans ces opérations de maintien de paix. Vous allez me dire, mais à quoi sert la langue française en matière de prévention ou en tout cas gestion des conflits? Eh bien, lorsque vous envoyez des ressortissants pakistanais en Haïti ou des policiers brésiliens pour faire le maintien de l'ordre, eh bien, malheureusement, il arrive des catastrophes. Parce que ce sont les forces de police qui sont le plus proches des populations et qui doivent les comprendre. Et doivent s'exprimer, évidemment, dans la langue des populations, qui doivent s'exprimer dans la langue qui peuvent protéger ces populations. Alors c'est cette méthode de dialogue qui permet, lors de chaque sommet de la francophonie, de se prononcer sur des textes politiques ambitieux. Et lors du dernier sommet, en 2014, à Dakar, se réunit sous le thème de femmes, jeunesse, vecteurs de paix et de développement, la francophonie a souhaité se doter d'un cadre stratégique de 8 ans, de résolutions portant sur le contre-terrorisme, sur la question évidemment du sida, des pandémies, évidemment du changement climatique. Bref, toutes ces problématiques mondiales qu'une organisation comme la francophonie doit traiter dans le cadre de son exception culturelle, puisque, encore une fois, 80 pays issus du G20 ou du G8 s'assoient à armes égales pour traiter de ces sujets d'actualité. Alors, 2 stratégies qui va peut-être, j'espère vous parler, une stratégie jeunesse, évidemment, et puis une stratégie économique, pour faire du français un vecteur et un moteur d'intégration, parce que, je vous le rappelle, 14% du PNB mondial est généré par nos pays membres, 14% du revenu national mondial, 20% des échanges, mais nos pays qui, encore une fois, sont extrêmement divers au niveau développement économique, eh bien, comptent 23 pays parmi les plus pauvres, qui figurent parmi les 48 pays membres du groupe des pays les moins avancés. Alors au nom d'une solidarité et au nom d'un devoir de partage, eh bien, la francophonie s'est mobilisée pour adopter cette stratégie économique et puis aussi réfléchir sur l'avenir du monde, qui évidemment, c'est peut-être un pléonasme, mais est l'avenir de la jeunesse. Et les chiffres le montrent, c'est l'Afrique, et l'Afrique francophone qui va porter le monde de demain, avec 80% des francophones et 80% des jeunes locuteurs qui seront âgés de 15 à 29 ans. Et ces jeunes vivront en Afrique. Alors, je voudrais aussi vous signaler une autre composante, et je suppose que vous l'avez travaillé durant ces 2 jours. Quelle serait la validité de ce processus sans interpeller ou sans inclure les contributions de la société civile? Je ne sais pas comment vos travaux ont été organisés, mais je suppose ou j'espère qu'il y avait des ONG ou des représentants d'ONG ou qui ont pu aussi participer à vos journées de négociation. Parce que ces pratiques de consultation intergouvernementale, interétatique, ne peuvent se prévaloir d'une légitimité sans la prise en compte ou l'intégration des représentants de la société civile. La francophonie, encore une fois, c'est un exemple parmi d'autres, mais a compris cela en organisant régulièrement, et l'UNESCO va le faire très prochainement, un forum de la jeunesse, mais a essayé d'organiser ça en matière de réseaux thématiques, professionnels, mais également de rencontres de la société civile issue des 5 continents pour se prononcer sur l'égalité homme-femme, pour se prononcer sur les questions de pratique et d'innovation, mais surtout pour permettre que cette société civile soit entendue avant, après les grands forums internationaux. C'était le cas pour la commission, pour la fameuse CEDAW, pour les femmes à l'ONU. C'est le cas au niveau des grandes rencontres de Bretton Woods pour que les préoccupations de la société civile soient entendues. Et c'est ces nouvelles formes de partenariat qui ont été mises à l'honneur lors de ce dernier sommet, puisque c'est aussi pour nous une école, puisque les préoccupations, les propositions de cette société civile francophone ont été portées à l'attention des chefs d'État et ont été intégrées dans la déclaration finale du sommet. Alors, je voudrais conclure, chers participants, sur cette réflexion partagée donc, sur les mécanismes de processus de décision, sur un enjeu qui nous est cher en francophonie, qui est celui de la diversité, vous l'avez compris. Parce que je voudrais vous poser une question, réflexion. Penser, élaborer, prendre des décisions dans un cadre monolingue contraignant, qui est celui des Nations Unies, me semble-t-il, ne peut pas contribuer objectivement à une pluralité de vision du monde, d'interaction féconde entre des cultures juridiques. Vous devez être bilingue, pas seulement en français et en anglais, vous devez être bilingue en common law et en droit germano-romain. Vous devez être amené à penser des dialogues nécessaires pour créer de nouvelles normes, penser de nouvelles formes de régulation, de gouvernance mondiale et entendre les bruissements et apaiser. Je crois que vous avez un rôle majeur en termes de diplomatie pour apaiser ces fameuses convulsions du monde, de ce monde multipolaire où le fait culturel, que vous le vouliez ou non, est immensément prégnant. Et à cet égard, l'effectivité du régime multilingue au sein d'organisations universelles comme l'ONU, mais comme bien d'autres, doit être considérée comme une nécessité impérieuse pour garantir et répondre aux exigences de paix. Je reprends votre thème de paix, de responsabilité, de diversité, qui sont les attendus manifestés par les peuples du monde à l'endroit de nos organisations. Alors je voudrais vous quitter sur ce discours un peu long, mais sur le fait qu'il faut que vous soyez convaincus de la mission qui vous incombe, celle des garants ou les gardiens de cette pluralité, c'est selon. Parce que vous serez demain, je crois lorsqu'on rentre dans ce Pimoun, on sent votre enthousiasme, on sent votre énergie, on sent aussi que vous êtes des intelligences en mouvement. Alors vous serez demain, moi je n'en ai aucun doute, compte tenu de votre intérêt et de votre engagement pour la diplomatie multilatérale, les acteurs et les constructeurs de cet ordre mondial pétri par la prise en compte de cette intraitable diversité du monde. Je vous remercie.